beast!
Oh, hell. Yeah.
Hello, Truth Seekers. Welcome back. I'm super excited today to have on a guest who's been referred to everything between a counter-jihadist and the most dangerous woman in America. No, it's not Hillary Clinton. This is Pamela Geller. And Pamela, you are the author of FATWA, which I just finished reading in the middle of the night last night. Outstanding book. Thank you so much for making the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I see you got a couple extra copies back there. I'd suggest everyone listening buy at least 2 so we can empty out the bookcase. And the book just came out. So tell us why people should buy it, and then we'll get into some of the details.
Well, longtime supporters of my work know I've never discussed the personal side, the private side of my work. But I thought it was time, because we were reaching a tipping point, that people understand that, how a quintessential New York City career girl goes from, loving art, music, fashion, books, literature, apolitical, to being the country's most notorious racist, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim bigot. And I say that quite seriously, even if it sounds like I'm making a joke. The fact is, we're living in an age of absurdity, the era of the absurd, where those that stand in defense of freedom are mocked, defamed, ridiculed, smeared, and destroyed. And those that stand with the enemy are exalted, praised, given, enormous contracts to speak at colleges and books and so on and so forth. It took me 7 years to get this book published. Book publishers were afraid of this book. I think it's kind of cool that it comes out right around the time of Halloween. But the fact is, I am but a proxy in this terrible long war. What has happened to me is what happens to every American in large or small ways who stand in defense of freedom. I was apolitical before 9/11. 9/11 was my political awakening. Previous to that, I assumed my freedom. I never for once thought that it would be in jeopardy. And I found out, I realized as I saw those towers come down, so did my premise, that my premise was wrong, my premise was false, that freedom is not absolute and ensured, that one must defend one's freedom. And I felt guilty that I didn't know who had attacked the country. And so I set about to find out, and I felt guilty as still that I didn't understand the ideology behind this war, this holy war. And so I read the Quran, and I read the great world scholars, the honest scholars on Islam, Ibn Waraq, Bacheyor, Robert Spencer, Wafa Sultan, Noni Darwish, and increasingly found myself marginalized, demonized, rendered radioactive because of my stand in defense of freedom. If you had told me, on 9/12/2001, that those who stood in defense of Americanism, individual rights and personal liberty, that we would be, demonized and monsterized, I would have had you Baker acted. I would have thought you were nuts and had you institutionalized. But that's exactly what has happened, which is why I wrote the book. Because the American people are being disarmed in the information battle space. The American people are being disarmed in the war of ideas. And this is where the war is right now. I mean, the bullets, the bombs, the bloodshed comes as a result of what happens in this war. I'm living under a fatwa. For your viewers who may be unfamiliar with what a fatwa is, it is a legal ruling by a recognized authority under Islam. It is a death sentence. And I am living in America under a constant death sentence, which, by the way, never expires. Salman Rushdie's fatwa was issued in 1989, and it's still as live and, as potent as it was in 89. And you saw with Hebdo, the Charlie Hebdo slaughter, French Paris weekly magazine whose editorial staff was slaughtered in cold blood because of a perceived insult to Islam, because of a depiction of Muhammad, because of a cartoon. And that fatwa was close to 2 years old. So there's no expiration date. And most people are unaware of this because the media is aligned with the jihad force. The media self-enforces the Sharia, does not criticize Islam, will not offend Islam, but will viciously bully, viciously attack anyone who doesn't cow, anyone who does not submit, anyone who is not as cowardly, and cravenly quisling as they are, will get their wrath in spades. And this is the sad state of the freedom of speech in America. And of course, there's so much in the book, TJ, that people are unaware of. I mean, even in Garland, which I was blamed for, I held a free speech event in Garland, and people said I shouldn't have done that I, sort of deserved that assassination attempt where jihadis opened fire on a free speech event. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s I had said to you, TJ, I have a crystal ball and I can see the future. And in the future, I see a cartoon controversy. Yes, people are being killed. Embassies are being burned. Christians are being slaughtered in Muslim countries because of a cartoon. People would be like, what? What did Disney do? Oh, my God. It would be unfathomable.
Culture appropriation, obviously. They deserve to die.
It would be unfathomable that, a cartoon, my morning Mo, as opposed to my morning Joe, would cause this kind of slaughter and violence. And yet America, the elite in America, the left, has accepted this premise and is imposing it on all of us. I was in Garland, Texas, and held a free speech event, an art exhibit showing Muhammad for two reasons. First, I didn't just throw a dart at a map and say, oh, I'm going to Garland. No. I was in Garland for a particular reason. In the wake of that Charlie Hebdo slaughter, Muslim leaders in this country, in the United States of America, held a conference in Garland, Texas at the Colwell Center. Now, wouldn't this have been a golden opportunity for American Muslims to stand with the freedom of speech for the First Amendment and show the world that they believed in, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, equality for all before the law? No. Muslim leaders gathered in Garland, Texas, just days after the Hebdo slaughter, to stand in support of the Sharia, stand in support of the ideology behind the slaughter, the bloodbath of writers, cartoonists, and journalists. So I held a conference in that same venue, in that same room in Garland, Texas, to stand in defense of freedom of speech, showing depictions of Muhammad over the past 1,400 years to show that people weren't being killed, in Dante's Inferno where they drew Muhammad. People weren't always being killed, that it was being a means today of violent intimidation to impose the Sharia, Islamic law. And of course, my point was made in the worst possible way by devout Muslims who attempted to slaughter us. And afterwards, the media was just descended like locusts in attacking me. Yeah, freedom of speech, but there are no buts. Just for now.
It's interesting. So I was going to save Garland as a wild card. There's probably a half a dozen things I read in your book where I went, interesting. I follow this stuff pretty closely. Had no idea about that. Didn't know one way or the other. And that's what I really like about reading things like this is when I pay pretty close attention, I still miss a lot. People who don't pay that much attention at all, they don't know anything about it. And I'll give you an example. I had a family member, when I started reading your book last week, I mentioned, I'm really excited. I get to talk to Pamela Geller. She's basically been blacklisted throughout the media. She's a horrible, hateful, bigoted, all the horrible things I've seen written about you. I'm really curious to find out why there's so much hate for this woman, because I stumbled upon your Atlas Shrugged blog back in 06, 07-ish, when I had finished reading Ayn Rand for the first time, thinking I was, reading Yaron Brook or some other Ayn Rand institutional thinker. And turns out I got you. And I started reading it thinking, man, this girl's a workhorse. She's all over the place. She literally is a working girl. One of your movies that you really, inspired you, that you really liked. I mean, you were a Cosmopolitan New Yorker in the industry, kind of quintessential. But the response I got from this family member, who I won't name, was, yeah, the Garland thing, I feel like she really shouldn't have done that. You're asking for trouble, right? And I thought, wait a minute. Like you and I think a lot alike. That might be true. I mean, you might know what you're getting yourself into, but to say it's wrong or to say you shouldn't do it or say you're provoking people by exercising free speech, like Matrix mind blow moment. Like we can't concede to that way of thinking. But as I turn the pages in the book, that's the kind of thinking that got us here. When you said earlier, you said so many things that I want to comment on. One of them was the way that you thought before and the way that now that you speak out, you're this horrible person. And you see tacit overlays of that everywhere in the media. I mean, just lately in the Las Vegas shooting, where you have people in prominent positions in society saying that these people actually deserve what they got because they're Trump voters. I'm thinking, this is the kind of thinking that got us here. And this is the kind of thinking that took you to where you were, to where you are now. And they hate you for it. They absolutely hate you. Every time I turn the page, you have an example of someone who labels you a horrible person because you are a truth teller and a feelings herder. And that really is the crime, right? You're making people feel like victims.
Well, the crime really when you peel back the layers of this rather rotting onion, is the Sharia. You cannot offend Islam. And this is the soft enforcement of the Sharia, the public shaming, the destroying of one's name. It's a form of murder to ruin one's good name and make it impossible for them to make a living. It is a form of murder. And what people have ceased to understand, because as you can see by this generation of millennials, which is really sort of like these zombies from Night of the Living Dead, they have no understanding of the First Amendment. By the way, it's not the 5th or the 8th or the 10th. It's the 1st. And it protects all speech, not just ideas that we like, because that's easy. It protects ideas that we don't like, because then who would decide what's good and what's forbidden? The government, the Democrats, Antifa, the Islamic State, as in the case of Garland, it was an Islamic State attack. Putting up with being offended is essential in a pluralistic society in which people differ on basic truths. If a group will not bear being offended without resorting to violence, that group will rule unopposed, while everyone else lives in fear, while other groups curtail their activities to appease the violent group. This results in the violent group being able to tyrannize the others. If speech that offends a group is outlawed, that group has absolute power.
There's a couple.
And a free society is destroyed. A group that cannot be criticized cannot be opposed.
There are a couple things in the book I definitely want to touch on. So let me throw these out there so we can kind of circle back to them. One is CPAC, and that chapter fascinated me. You talk about the unraveling of the conservative union, right? And what's wrong with the right. That chapter was fantastic. You talked about ad wars, and I think for someone who maybe doesn't live in New York or isn't watching the news every day, every single paragraph in that book will really surprise and shock them. And I was sitting there silently cheering in my bed at 2 a.m. reading and going, get them, Pamela, get them. I love it. And you've got the new one that's out right now. I don't have a picture pulled up. Maybe I'll overlay it here of the new documentary that you're making. And can we talk about this? And I've been using that line all the time when someone gets angry. Can we talk about this? And secretly in my head thinking about, what if this person just wanted to behead me and end it right here, like Rigby in London, right? Maybe that's the way we could solve our problems. And the other two are
Theo Van Gogh. Those were his last words. Dutch filmmaker Theo Van Gogh, great-great-grandson of Vincent van Gogh, was beheaded in broad daylight on a public street in Amsterdam by a jihadi who, felt that he had offended Islam. And those were Theo Van Gogh's last words to his murderer, his devout Muslim murderer, was, "Can't we talk about this?"
No, we can't. We don't do it that way.
Yeah.
And then the one that really got me is this whole idea of mindset between, Jasser and the court cases and George Bush's setting the tone after 9/11 for what would become the longest protracted war in American history. And then, of course, Garland and the FBI. So I don't know how we unpack all that stuff, but these are just things that stuck out to me. And I said, wow, people have to read this book. And also, you mentioned being blacklisted, how hard it is for you to make a living and raise funds because nobody wants to talk about this. And that kind of hit home a little bit. I've interviewed Narni Darwish. I'm probably saying her name right. Lovely, lovely gal. Really enjoyed it. I interviewed Raheem Kassam recently. And what I've been doing is sending out articles to
all my pals.
Yeah, all your buddies, all the Hateful Eight, for sure.
They really are. They're all my buds.
And there are more buds of yours I'd like to interview because I feel like it's dangerous work what you do, and you're a superhero. I mean, literally, you've got people out there looking to kill you every single day. And when I read Ali's book for the first time, I felt the same way. And so you look at people like Robert Spencer, like they're literally going straight into the fire, knowing that the likely outcome someday is death because it's happened to some of your friends and associates. Should that not alone be a reason for you to be put on a platform and say, listen to what this person has to say? But even myself, my little old channel, when I post summaries and try to put articles out, if it's Raheem or Nani or anything to do with Islam, they won't touch it. Like no interest whatsoever. Just like, no, thank you. We're going to pass on this one. And I've seen a little microcosm of that on my end. I can only imagine what it's like for you being disinvited from CPAC, not being invited on the college circuit because the truths that you're saying are far too inconvenient to be heard in the public sphere.
And this is where the war is, in the information battle space. And this is why they monsterize me, because they will not debate me. It's much easier to make a monster out of me because who's going to listen to the message of a monster? I mean, this is a very effective strategy. Their ideas, the left, this leftist-Islamic alliance, and don't think for 1 second that this progression of Sharia and jihad in the West would have been possible without the alliance, without this leftist-Islamic axis. The left was critical to their advancement. But this idea that they won't debate me, you see, because their ideas will not stand up to challenge. Their ideas will not stand up to scrutiny. My ideas are better. My ideas of individual rights and freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, equality for all before the law are better. I will win. I will win in the war of ideas, which is why we never even have the debate, which is why I'm made into a monster. You'll notice that whenever I'm named, when they're forced to cover a story, for example, last week in Boston, the leader of a Muslim group had plotted to behead me. And the leader, Dawood Wright, was on trial for this beheading plot, ISIS-inspired beheading plot, and was found guilty. Thank you, Boston jurors, because it's easy to get caught up in all of the bogus narrative of the media. But they saw through it, and they convicted him on all charges. And Dawood Wright, that was the ringleader of this beheading plot, is now facing life in prison. Okay. Now, when they have to cover a news story, either they ignore that I was the target or, leader of a hate group. I'm the leader of the American Freedom Defense Initiative, a human rights organization dedicated to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and equality for all before the law. That's my group. But mind you, it's always a hate group, because a real hate group, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, says so. But the media has given the Southern Poverty Law Center the imprimatur of legitimacy. The media has given CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, an unindicted co-conspirator in the largest terrorist funding trial in our nation's history. Half of their leadership has been convicted of jihad terror-related crimes. The UAE has designated CARE a terrorist group. But according to the media, the Council of American Islamic Relations is akin to Martin Luther King for Muslims. No joke.
And more of the similarities when I'm reading. I mean, you're not incredibly, you don't point your finger to them directly, but you talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center mentioning that they don't have any interest in debating these groups or just stopping them. They need to destroy them. And then you talk about a Muslim Brotherhood document that was leaked that said, our goal is basically, and you can correct me because I'm paraphrasing, to subvert and destroy the West from within. And you look at those two lines and say they run pretty much parallel, if not in unison.
Yes.
They have the same goal.
Yeah, to destroy Western civilization from within by their own hand, meaning by our own hand. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what's happening. I mean, we are destroying ourselves from within. The left has aligned with the jihad force. People don't understand that. I think it's very elemental. This is not a left versus right battle. Essentially, when you boil it down to its essential oils, it's the individual versus the state. It's individualism versus collectivism, individualism versus statism. Now, the left has always aligned itself with the totalitarian leftist ideology of the day. 100 years ago, it was communism, Stalinism, the National Socialist Workers' Party, right? I mean, that was the Nazi Party. Today, they say Nazis are hard right. Nazis are hard left. Read Mein Kampf. Yes, Hitler was a vicious Jew hater. He's a hard leftist. The idea that it's a hard right ideology is just the left perverting, revising history, because that is what they do to advance their narrative, and they've never been challenged. They have a chokehold on the culture in terms of media, movies, music. It's the zeitgeist. And now that there's pushback vis-a-vis shows like yours, websites like mine, of course, we don't have the enormous audience of, let's say, a 60 Minutes, but the sum is greater. The sum is greater than the parts, which is why they were shocked when President Trump was elected. Shocked. How did it happen? We have music, movies, media, public schools, academia. How? And they looked around and they said, it had to be these websites and talk radio. And how do they get their message out there? Social media. So now we have seen, for people like myself, it's gotten much harder under Trump, because social media giants are run by uniformly leftist corporate managers. And for example, my page, I have a number of pages on Facebook, AFDI, SIA, and so on. But my Pamela Geller page has 1.2 million followers. And they are blocked now from getting my newsfeed, my website, Geller Report, which was Atlas Shrugs, which you became a fan of in 2006. Updates to my page. Now that my feed is blocked, Google AdSense, which has a monopoly on ads online. It just does. They suspended and terminated my account because my website was, quote, dangerous and derogatory. Pinterest, the housewives' go-to social media platform, cannot share my links, inappropriate content. YouTube deleted my channel. PayPal deleted my account. Now, PayPal and YouTube reinstated me because of the mass outcry on social media. Tens of thousands of retweets, people tweeting at them, became a public relations nightmare, and they reinstated my account. So people need to understand you have power. You still have power. But, I am suing the Department of Justice, for the social, for the immunity that is granted social media giants under Section 230 of the FEC code. They get protection from freedom of speech lawsuits. So before you can sue Facebook, or before you can sue a YouTube or a Twitter who has shadow banned me, for example, you have to get their immunity removed. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the way to fix this problem. I don't know if we need antitrust. And now let me tell you, I despise antitrust. I never believed in the Sherman Act back in the late 1800s. Right. I don't believe in it. But in this case, because they did do it, because they did take down Standard Oil and they did take down American Tobacco, and President Clinton did sue Microsoft. This is real, jeopardy, where you have enormous power in the hands of so few. Now, in the last century, your telephone number was how you communicated with people. And they took down Ma Bell. They broke up Ma Bell into Baby Bells. And I say today, your IP address is how you communicate. The idea that Facebook, decides which comments of my followers is or isn't permissible and puts them in Facebook jail and bans them and blocks them, I'm sorry. This is how we communicate. And while I don't want their money, I don't want to nationalize their revenue, I do believe that we will have to adhere to the First Amendment, because this is how we communicate today. And the idea that Google search has scrubbed all of Google of my 16 years of work, over 40,000 posts, and not just me. If you Google Islam, Sharia, jihad, where I used to come up in the top search, Jihad Watch used to come up in the top search, we are nowhere. We've been scrubbed. Now what you get is apologetics for Islam. This is when people say, there's no Sharia in this country. It's everywhere. It's every day in everything you see. These ad wars that you mentioned, where I ran ads or tried to run ads, always in response to either a pro-Sharia or pro-jihad or anti-Jewish ad, I had to sue to get my ads up. And every suit I won. Wow. I forced the city to run my ads. And then you know what happened? In New York, in Washington, in Miami, in Boston, in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Denver, they banned political ads. The Geller ban. They banned because of my little ads saying stuff like, in any war between the civilized man and the savage, support the civilized man. And I'm cribbing from Ayn Rand, by the way, on that one. Right. Support Israel, defeat jihad. I mean, this was just
can't have it.
Heads exploded on the left, because truth now has become so toxic. Truth is the new hate speech. And what is truth but the recognition of reality? But this is the low state of freedom of speech in this country. And I tell you, the American people are painfully, woefully unaware. It's like they're Helen Keller. And someone moved the furniture. And it should be required. This book should be required reading for every American who cares about their freedom, who cares about their First Amendment
just for the ad wars section alone, there are dozens of examples, and they all ended in lawsuits. And like you said, you won them all. I want to ask you specifically about the San Francisco one because of the whole gays for Sharia narrative. This blows my mind. I'm going to play the token card. I've got some gay friends, and I think, how would you be okay with your people selling you down the river? Which is also the case you make about cultural Jews and the, kind of the ties that has back to the Holocaust period. Fascinating stuff. Before we do that, I listened to your interview with Milo. A couple thoughts on this. One, I really, really think there's a chance Milo goes straight for you. He's just he's so into you, it's ridiculous.
I just want to say something about Milo very, very quickly.
Go ahead.
He's enormously brave. He would have his own show if he, switched sides. And that he published this book, a book that I did not submit this book to any other book publisher because my last 5 proposals were rejected out of hand by every publishing house because of security issues. And I just want to say that Milo is enormously brave, not only to wait a minute, I just want to show you something.
Sure.
Not only to publish this book, which in and of itself was an enormous act of bravery, but there's a section in here, I really should have marked it, oh, man. There's a section in here with photos, and I got it. And he published...
Page 120, right?
He published the Muhammad cartoon. I mean, you would think it's nothing. There you have Muhammad looking very studly, saying, "You can't draw me." And the cartoonist's hand saying, "That's why you draw me." I just think it's a brilliant... This is the cartoon that caused an international... look at that. An international incident, assassination plots, assassination attempts, and the left elite in this country agreeing with the savages. It's extraordinary.
It's tepid. Like, I get it's profound, but it's nothing. It's just a cartoon. It's a drawing. It's amazing to me. That's the amazing one, Theo, that I love that picture. That is just awesome. Can we talk about this? No, we don't do that.
That's my Hitchcock-inspired. I love making the ads. I do. Big Fur Hat, he gets into my brain. It's kind of scary. And I tell him what I want, and he really executes what I want. He can execute what I see. And yeah, it's been fabulous. I love doing those ads. The problem, of course, is that we can't run them anywhere anymore. And American people are painfully unaware. I think it's a big story that New York City banned political ads. New York City, the capital of the free world. New York City, who never in the history of the transit system ever has banned ads on its subway, political ads on its, or cause-related or religious ads on the subway.
Well, their local government's totally fiscally sound. They don't need the money. It's not a big deal. Of course, it's aggregate. Well, I want to go back to the Milo issue. When you guys were talking about the IP address, I hadn't thought about this very much, but you mentioned at the very end, if they can shadow ban you on Google, if they can control what's said on Facebook, he goes, this is government collusion, right? These are the dangerous people, the fascists who get in bed with government and start to tell people what they can do, what they can say, what they can think. The word I mention a lot is what does Antonio Gramsci call it? Forceful seduction, right? We don't want to use guns. We don't want to use intimidation. We want to make it unpalatable for you to say certain things on your own accord. And when you talked about what happens when the utility companies say, you know what, this is a person, if you can't go speak at colleges, if you can't advertise in the public circle, what happens when they say, you know what, this person, do we really want to give water to this person? Do we really think they deserve electricity? Like, this is a person who shouldn't be a member of society. You get that on the political side. You have Al Gore saying he doesn't debate anyone, and Bill Nye saying they stop short of stabbing you. They just say you should be put in jail, right? So that's the soft tyranny of bad ideas. But I want to talk about gays in Sharia because this is the one that really got me, right? If you live in San Francisco and you're advocating for pro-gay rights, to be banned by them and to have a court case go against you because the things you're saying are hateful, when it's going to save the lives of people who are just like them, this is a head scratcher for me. Tell the audience who aren't familiar with it what happened in San Francisco.
Well, it's very interesting because, again, as I said, my ads are a response to a campaign of either deception, deceit, or dissembling. And CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, which is a Muslim Brotherhood group as so named by the U.S. government in the largest terrorist funding trial in our nation's history, created, to much exaltation, a jihad campaign, rebranding the word jihad. What it was a campaign of deception to disarm the American people as to what jihad is. If you've read the Quran, you know that jihad is holy war. And there's not one hadith that speaks to a spiritual jihad. It's all holy war. So this idea that it's just a struggle internally is just deception. And taqiyya, which is lying to advance Islam, which is a religious imperative under Islam. Taqiyya, if you lie to advance Islam, it's righteous. Anyway, CARE created a campaign called My Jihad. And what it was rebranding the word jihad. My jihad is getting to the gym every day. My jihad is, not burning my toast in the morning or some such nonsense. My jihad is making friends. So what I did was I created a campaign using prominent Muslim leaders, their actual quotes, and running them across the country. Now, when CARE did this My Jihad campaign, the media just was all over it. They were just creaming. They were so excited. Look at this, my jihad. When I did mine, I can't even begin to tell you the kind of fierce hostility. And I used the president of Turkey, Erdogan, saying the mosques are our fortresses, the minarets are our bayonets, and the faithful Muslims are soldiers. This is a quote from him.
He was the same one who said there's no such thing as a moderate Muslim, right?
He said there is no moderate Islam, there is no extreme Islam. Islam is Islam. He said that to President Obama. And I used a quote from the president of Iran, saying that all gays should be put to death. Now, in San Francisco, when I did the campaign in San Francisco, I used the quotes about gays from Muslim leaders because I thought that was appropriate. Here you have, no pun intended, the Mecca of the gay community in this country, and what better place to highlight the Muslim oppression of gays than in San Francisco. One only needs to do a cursory search to see that they're thrown off roofs in the Palestinian territories. Faces, a razor blade is taken around the face, and their faces are pulled off. I mean, I can't even begin to give you the excruciating oppression, subjugation, and torture of gays under the Sharia, under Islamic law. But what was stunning in San Francisco is in the very first resolution of its kind, the city council condemned me and condemned my work. And the leader of the Human Rights Council, Teresa Spark, who was a transgender, publicly denounced me and said that it was actually better for transgenders in Iran than it was here in America, which is wildly astonishing, because what happens in Iran is gays are forced to cut their junk off and become women. Teresa Spark was saying, well, they pay for the transgender surgeries in Iran. The government pays. It's not voluntary. It's involuntary. I mean, this is just how shockingly uninformed. I don't know if Teresa Spark doesn't know. I don't know if Teresa Spark doesn't care. I don't know if Teresa Spark is so married to the dogma that her peers that are suffering under the boot of the Sharia can go to hell, in her opinion. I don't know. But what I do know is if you are in a position of influence and authority, you are obligated to know. If you can influence people, you are obligated to know. And so, yes, it does bother me when I see this nonsense of bending the knee here in this country, a country where, for example, African Americans have the highest standard of living, the only moral country in the history of man that went to war to free the slaves. They're bending a knee at the time where, for example, 20% of the population of Mauritania are black slaves living under Muslim rule, living under Muslim slave owners.
Black Lives Matter.
They don't.
We hear about that all the time. Mauritanian slaves. I was reading about that this morning, actually, in USA Today.
It's one of the ads that I ran under, when they ran Israeli apartheid, which again is a blood libel that is patently untrue. I ran a series of ads, Islamic apartheid, that shows women being flogged in Muslim countries for perceived sexual indiscretion. There's a young black child in slaves, where I cite that statistic. And mind you, every one of my ads, I have to substantiate with 5 primary sources. And I do. But when I once asked, how do they substantiate Israeli apartheid? You run that. How are they substantiating that ad? You know what I was told by the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority? I was told the following. Oh, that's opinion. Your ads are facts, so you have to substantiate it. This is how convoluted.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I instinctively thought it was the opposite. When there's no cognitive dissonance about the ad content, they run it because they agree with it, right? When they hear what you're saying, go, this lady's crazy. Then you submit 5 factual sources. They go, all right, maybe there's some truth to it. I guess we have to run. That was what I defaulted to.
It's not even that. It's that they have to run it because they know we're going to court and they know I've already won. I already won against the Washington Transit Authority. I won. We sued to get my jihad ad up. I'm saying I won. Now, my last suit ended when they banned all political ads, which is it was a free speech suit. And now the ACLU is jumping on sort of my back and suing because they can't get their ads up. It's kind of it's a sword that cuts both ways. That was the one good thing that came out of the ban. I'm a free speech advocate, so I don't want the ban. I believe the antidote to bad speech is more speech, not burning books or shutting down speech or other fascist policies that they would impose on us. But you see, they can't run their ads. These Muslim groups, these anti-Israel groups, these pro-Sharia groups. So that was the one good thing that came out of it. But of course, if I had my druthers, like I said, my ideas are better, which is why there was always such a visceral reaction to my ideas and my ads, because the truth was shocking. It would shock people, even though it was very elemental.
Prager talks about how leftism eventually destroys whatever it touches. And I think it's ironic when you were talking about Hitler and this, controversy over whether he was left wing and right wing. I interviewed Paul Kengor. I haven't posted it yet, but he writes on communism beautifully, I might add. And his interview will go up after yours since you're my Halloween special. But he talks about how if you're really curious about what these people believed, look at what they plan to do, look at who they associate with, and look at what their intentions were and what the game plan was. And he goes, and if you look at the takeover of the media, the creeping takeover of government institutions and judge seats and all these other things, he goes, this was their plan from the beginning. What I find really interesting is when he talks about FDR and Stalin and how these communists are only too fond of finding liberal dupes, which, by the way, I don't know if it was FDR or I think it was FDR that the communist code name for him was liberal, quote, liberal. He goes, they're only too fond of finding these advocates who either don't know or don't care, like you said, to help them carry out the means that they're looking for. So when I read about Teresa Sparks, when I read about Stedman, and when I read about these people who, in your words, are sharpening the swords of their executioners, it's fascinating to me because they've been totally duped and it's going to be to their own extermination. I mean, killing ads is one thing. That ruins the fun for all of us, just like the NFL. But eventually it ends really bad for them first. I mean, they're the first ones to go. I'm not media. I'm not gay. Go ahead.
The left, people always ask me this, in the event that they win, which they won't because freedom lovers will defeat them. But in the event that they won, then of course they'll go after each other. But right now, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they are both anti-American. They are both anti-freedom. And so this leftist-Islamic alliance is a natural. And don't think for one second that the global jihadists are any more brutal than the left. We know that there were 100 million murdered outside of war under communism. The left can be just as savage as the jihadists.
And the peons are disposable, but it's the higher ups that are targeted for purging. And that's what's ironic to me. I mean, who are the ones who had to be discarded immediately? Anyone who was a threat to power. And typically those were people who had been advocates and useful idiots. And
they adopt terms, the Sharia terms. Look, Islamophobia is a term we're flogged with constantly. In the wake of every jihad attack, when we are targeted, we are then accused of Islamophobia or fear of backlash. That never happens. This goes back to 9/11. Backlashophobia. Islamophobia, this term amounts to little more than enforcement of Sharia in the marketplace of ideas. Any criticism of jihad terror that examines its ideological roots in Islam is called Islamophobia. The word is used to intimidate people into thinking that there's something wrong with opposing jihad terror. And what happens is this deforms our response to terrorism by placing off limits any examination of its guiding ideology, and it effectively enforces Sharia blasphemy laws in the U.S. by placing Quran, Islam, Muhammad beyond criticism. Islamophobia is a thought-crushing device designed to silence any criticism of Islam. That's where we are.
Can we extrapolate that to a thought experiment? You said something about George Bush right after 9/11 that I didn't know about when he took the Muslim leaders into a mosque and said the things he did about Islam to kind of set the tone for how we would approach the situation for the next decade and a half. Wouldn't it have been useful? Did George Bush not know about the quote you have in your book? I think it was the president of Bosnia who said in 1969 that we must start taking over the power as soon as it is morally in America strong enough not only overthrow the existing non-Islamic, but also to build up a new Islamic authority. I mean, these are world leaders talking about what the game plan is a few decades before my lifetime.
And that document, the Muslim Brotherhood strategy document, saying that we will, destroy Western civilization from within by their own hand. And they, in subsequent documents, and I suggest everybody read the documents that were entered into evidence in the largest terrorist funding trial in our nation's history. They said America was much easier than they thought it would be. And the three critical components to imposing Islam was money, media, and men. And that's exactly what they used. Insofar as Bush, I can tell you that Bush going arm in arm with Muslim Brotherhood groups, Hamas groups like the Council of American Islamic Relations, to a mosque a week after 9/11 and saying that Islam is a religion of peace is indicative of just how much they had infiltrated previous to 9/11. I mean, for me, that was a crushing moment. I didn't know it at the time, but what a teachable moment that was squandered. And it was exemplar of how far the stealth jihad had advanced in this country. Let me tell you something. When Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of the jihad terrorists on 9/11, was on that plane heading to the World Trade Center, he repeatedly told the people, the passengers on the plane, stay quiet and you'll be all right. Just stay quiet and you'll be all right. And that's exactly what they're telling us today. Stay quiet and you'll be all right. I'm here to tell you that you will not be all right. That the last thing you should do is stay quiet. That is what they count on. They count on your complacency, they count on your apathy, and they count on your empathy to destroy you. And this is what the American people are woefully, painfully unaware of. This book will shake people. This book will shock people. It is a true story. It's a story that Hollywood would never tell because Hollywood vets their screenplays. Hollywood vets their screenplays by MPAC, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, to make sure that they don't offend or insult Islam. Do you know that? Yes.
Was it the sum of all fears that you quoted in your book as the one that CARE actually got them to change the terrorists to neo-Nazis?
And if you think about it, there have been over 31,000 deadly Islamic attacks since 9/11. And yet, every time you see a terrorist in a Hollywood movie, it's Russian or Serb or some other absurd notion. Look, we have been disarmed. It wasn't just George Bush. Look at the FBI. The FBI was at Garland. The FBI was in on the planning of Garland. We know that because of the texts that were released in an ISIS recruiting trial in North Carolina. ISIS recruiter Eric Jamal Hendricks was texting with an FBI agent about Garland where he said, tear up Texas. The left loved that, calling it entrapment, that he would, nonsense. I believe in embedding with jihad cells. I believe that's how you're going to thwart terror attacks. What I didn't agree with was being at my event, texting with the jihadis. The FBI was doing this. How many people were there, how much FBI was there, how much law enforcement was there. They were in the car behind the jihadis. And when the jihadists got out of the car, they took cell phone footage of them. They got out, FBI got out, took cell phone footage of the jihadis. And when the jihadis started firing, opened fire on a free speech event in Texas, the FBI got back in the car and drove away. The Garland police pulled them over because they thought they were part of the attack. The FBI had no one there to protect us. The FBI had no one there to defend us. It was my SWAT team. It was my security that took out the jihadis. And a guard who was shot by the devout Muslims who drove 1,000 miles from Phoenix is suing the FBI today for aiding and abetting the Islamic State in that plot.
He's lucky to be alive. And by the way, what if they'd killed 300? What if it was Las Vegas, right? And dozens or hundreds of people died and the FBI was there and did nothing? I still can't really wrap my head around that. You posit that perhaps there were people at that event that they wanted to get killed, and your name's at the top of that list.
I think they did want. I do think that the Obama administration wanted an incident to put a chilling effect on the freedom of speech. This was a president that got up before the world at the UN a week after the September 11, 2012 jihad attacks in Benghazi and said, "The future does not belong to those who slander the prophet." That is a statement of a Muslim leader in a Muslim country, not the president of the United States, who blamed a jihad attack on the First Amendment. Listen, the FBI has been severely compromised. I'd like to know who gave the stand-down order. I have filed a letter of inquiry with the Internal Affairs Division of the FBI 3 times, and I've gotten no response. We know now, it came out in the beheading trial last week, in the plot to behead me, that the FBI was communicating with those jihadis too, and they never warned me or told me. We know that Omar Mateen, the jihadi who opened fire on a gay nightclub in Orlando, called 911, pledged his allegiance to the Islamic State, and 10 months later the FBI said they don't know what his motive is. And as far as Vegas goes, Vegas is the most troubling of all. The Islamic State took credit for Vegas. We have never seen them take credit for an event that was not theirs, even when refuted, like the jetliner, the passenger jet in the Sinai that was shot down, was blown up, ISIS took credit for it, law enforcement poo-pooed it, dismissed it, and then weeks later, the Islamic State supplied proof, an actual photo of the bomb. And of course, law enforcement had to backpedal with their tail between their legs because it was ISIS.
To the uninitiated, this sounds like conspiracy theory. So for people who don't know that much about the event, I could refer back to my family member who said, you know what, we really shouldn't do this. That mindset taken out to the nth degree is we have to teach people a lesson who want to do this. So think about the fact that these guys were there. The FBI knew that they were going to kill someone. They had you on their FATWA list. And when the shooting started, they left. And you had paid for your own security. You had your own SWAT guys there. And they're the ones, like in many attacks that are foibled, average citizens or unmarked, armed law enforcement officers stop the shooting right when it starts. And they killed this guy and no one got killed. What would have happened if you had been killed? What would have happened if 24 people got shot? How would it be different today? Because now you're digging, but you'd be gone. So take us through that.
It would have had a chilling effect on freedom of speech. People just simply wouldn't, they just would be afraid to do it, which, by the way, has happened anyway. You know, the cartoons are a flashpoint in the discussion about free speech, but I didn't make the cartoons a flashpoint. The jihadis did. And does anyone really think they're going to stop with cartoons? If you give in on this point, you will have to give in on everything. If you reward violence with submission, you will get more violence and more demands of submission. And I find it deeply disturbing that in the case of Vegas, and I bring it up because there's been a blackout now, official information blackout by authorities on Vegas, in the worst mass shooting, the most egregious, savage mass shooting in American history. You have Stephen Paddock, who went to the Mideast multiple times. We never hear about that. Where'd he go? What was his itinerary? Who'd he meet with? Nobody, not one reporter inquired. Over 200 of his foreign financial transaction, were flagged for possible covert terrorism financing. Never heard a reporter ask about that. Never heard anything further about that from the FBI. And not one reporter ever asked the salient question: was he a convert to Islam? ISIS said he was. ISIS said he converted 6 months ago. ISIS said his name was Abdullah al-Amariki. I mean, this is unbelievable that no one's even talking about this. To mention it makes you Islamophobic. The fact that the world's leading Islamic terrorist organization has claimed responsibility, and our people are dead. Young people, beautiful young people who were singing the national anthem at a country music festival in Vegas, you know, the quintessential city of Western, pleasure, as it were, iconic, threatened numerous times with ISIS attacks. ISIS said they were going to target it, and yet no one is talking about it. No one is talking about Vegas. They're still talking about Charleston. They're still talking about that bogus attack. Okay, but they're not talking about Vegas.
I've already gone over the time that I asked for. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the fact that you got banned from CPAC, that Fox News won't play you, that Megyn Kelly and 3 or 4 other people, including Bill O'Reilly, the saint that he is, said some disparaging things about you, and that you're a little volatile, vicious, unhinged, whatever. And I think my question always is it true or is it untrue? Like, that's all I care about. It's either true or it's not true. And the fact that you just said every single time they've taken responsibility for a terrorist act, it turns out to be true. I had heard that, and I'd seen that in an article a week or 2 ago. That's very interesting. And you're right, I haven't heard about Vegas for several days. So I would love to go into more about how you basically single-handedly stopped the Ground Zero Mosque. I don't think that you get enough credit for that in the general news cycle. The fact the CPAC story was fascinating to me, and the power brokers that are so-called conservatives, and the people they also platformed there, by the way, in the last couple of years that have basically nothing to add to the national dialogue. But I don't think I can top what you said earlier about what it's going to take to defeat this ideology and the decision people are going to have to make. I mean, I usually ask guests, what do we do about the problem? The problem is, I think I know the answer already. People have to quit being afraid of what they're going to have to do eventually if they want their country to survive. Take us home with that. What's it going to take, Pamela?
Listen, if it's only a handful of us, they can kill us. But if everybody stands up for freedom of speech, if everybody stands up for our very way of life, they cannot kill us all. Americans have been disarmed in the information battle space. First, get educated. That's the first primary thing you must do. This is a great place to start. This is a true story. It's a story that Hollywood will never tell. And then you have to share it. Then you have to educate others in your sphere of influence. You have a sphere of influence. And don't say, oh, it's too small. There's no such thing. The sum is much greater than the parts.
Agreed.
You have to educate others. We have to build an army of Davids against this Goliath. And it is a Goliath. It is an enormously well-funded leftist-Islamic machine. But by the same token, we know how that turned out, David and Goliath. We will win. Our ideas are better. But there are no casual observers in this war. There's a right side and there's a wrong side. And the middle of the road, sitting on the fence, is evil. And any compromise, as Ayn Rand said, between food and poison, death wins. There can be no compromise on this. There can be no butt heads. Yes, freedom of speech, but no butt heads. Okay? You must get involved, if not for your sake, for your children's sake and your children's children's sake. One only has to look at Europe to see what our future could be. But first and foremost, you have to get involved, and this book will scare you, but in a very good way. It will inoculate you against what's coming, and it will, fortify you and teach you how to fight the leftists in the information battle space, the jihadists, the stealth jihadists in the war of ideas. And this is where the battle is being fought, and we need everyone to be a soldier in this war.
Pamela Geller of the Geller Report. Transgenders and Hollywood actors are brave today, but I think having a death sentence over your head in America and being literally hunted is true bravery. I appreciate your sacrifice. I appreciate what you're doing, and I recommend everyone run out and buy at least one copy of this book, more if you can afford it, to give them away as gifts. You're going to learn a lot, and you are going to arm yourself, as she says. So, Pamela, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck and success with the book. It needs to be heard.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you.